Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And Alex, I couldn't have said that better. What is going to happen in Germany is a good thing. But, and as a lawyer, you always have a but, it is probably not as optimistic as we all thought. A year ago, I was standing here at the same desk and was actually asking, what is the government doing? What is the government do with regard to recreational? What kind of impact it may have on the medical market? And what I'm going to do with you within the next 45 minutes is have a look at what has happened since then. What can we expect? What may be the impacts on the viable medical market for cannabis in Germany? And as a good German speaker, I have my agenda. Oops, here we are. First of all, I give you an overview about what has happened since a year ago. We will then have a look at the so-called two-pillar model, which is the plan of the German government to implement recreational cannabis in Germany. We will then, of course, also have a look into this new draft act, which has been leaked. It is not yet officially released, but we had the chance to look at it. And of course, what is the time frame? What's going to happen? When can we expect the opening of the market? And what is really the impact? And last but not least, do we have real positive potential with regard to the legalization of cannabis? And I use the short form of recreational cannabis. It is actually the use of cannabis for adult use for recreational purposes. That's too long, so I just say recreational cannabis, if you will. So let's look in what has happened in that last year. As we all know, the government changed in 2021, and the federal government and the three coalition parties, the Social Democrats, the Green Party, as well as the Free Democrats, have actually implemented in their coalition agreement that they will go for the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes. That was a two-sentence statement. And in June 2022, there was an expert hearing initiated by Burkhard Bliner, the drug commissioner in Germany, to see what are the positive and maybe even negative impacts on the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes. What has happened then is in October 2022, the Federal Minister of Health, Karl Lauterbach, actually presented a key point paper. And everybody got very excited about that because it actually had the framework of a total legalization program for adults of recreational cannabis. It contained very detailed provisions regarding the cultivation, the distribution, and even the control of the distribution, everything under government control, meaning cultivation under government control, the distribution through licensed dispensaries, and as well, of course, as far as possible, the use of cannabis by adults. So everybody was very excited. But here again, there was also a but. We all know that there are legal hurdles. We discussed that actually a year ago. I was actually pointing it out that we have the various UN conventions, in particular the 1961 Convention. But what is even more important is that the Schengen Agreement itself stipulates very clearly the prohibition of all kinds of drugs, including cannabis, for recreational purposes. And the Schengen Agreement is the basis for the European Union. And of course, there are protocols following the Schengen Agreement, which reiterated that the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes is prohibited. So in 2022, the German government turned around 180 degrees. They clearly stated and argued that the prohibition of recreational cannabis did not fit the purpose. We have an increasing illicit market. Giving you some ballpark figures here, the current medicinal market is in the region of 20 to 25 metric tons a year. The illicit market is around 400, even maybe 600 metric tons a year, and increasing in Germany. So this gives you a little bit of outline what we are talking about here. The government actually took that position paper plus the arguments which for the legalization of cannabis, which was very similar as the Canadian have used it. Of course, further protection of the youth, protection of the consumer in order to increase by increasing the quality of the respective product, and of course, attacking the illicit market. The government went to the European Commission in October 2022 with this position paper, and in an informal process asked the European Commission, can we do it? Why? Because Germany and the German government was afraid that the European Commission and even any of the member states would initiate a legal proceeding for the breach of the Schengen Agreement before the European Court of Justice. And those who are familiar with politics and Germany and the European Court of Justice know that we have lost just recently big time again. Germany has lost recently very big time before the European Court of Justice for their data protection policy. So they wanted to avoid another judgment of the European Court of Justice and have asked the Commission, so can we do it? Well, what happened is, and nobody said it that clearly, but I'm going to say it clearly, they said, no, you can't do it. Very clearly. The government was talking about productive talks, which they had with the European Commission, but they were not that productive, to say at least, because they did not allow that we are going to implement this law, which we had actually envisaged back in October 2022. So what has happened? Plan B. Plan B was taken out of the box, and Plan B was presented in April this year with a two-pillar model, which I will explain in a minute, a little bit more detail. This two-pillar model is, of course, compared to the approach of October 22, a real setback, to say at least. And that is, from our point of view, disappointing, and for the industries, it's disappointing. And what has now come into the discussion, what is now stipulated in this new two-pillar approach is, I would say, not that promising. But we will see that in a minute. So the concrete draft law was leaked in May 2023, so just recently. And we will have a look into that law a little bit more in detail. What does the two-pillar model of this official key point paper actually say? So that's kind of interesting because the German government now looked into the box. What can we do with regard to the legalization, and took everything what they could find, which was in the framework which they believe of the European agreements and the UN agreements. So what is this two-pillar model all about? First of all, the first pillar, which is now under discussion, allows the individual self-cultivation of 3 female plants per adult in a household. Yes, oops. Secondly, it is the community self-cultivation allowed. We will have the possibility to establish in a German Vereinsstruktur, which you would say is kind of an association. It's not a cannabis club as actually promoted. It's a cultivation association of up to 500 members who can actually grow cannabis, self-cultivation by the club, by the association, by this cultivation association, and of course then forward that to or hand it over to its members for a fee. The point is this community self-cultivation, this association, is a non-profit organization. That has been clearly stipulated in that draft law. And we'll come back to that in a minute. And of course, the licensing and the monitoring of these clubs will be done by the respective state authorities. So that's pillar number 1. And I'll come back to that in a minute. And there are some more interesting facts about that. Second pillar is a regionally limited, scientifically monitored model project. That is possible under the UN conventions, as we all know, for scientific purposes. That is implemented already in Switzerland, as we know, earlier this year. And the Netherlands are going a similar route, maybe not the same. And this will be actually implemented in a second step. So the first step is self-cultivation, individual and community. And the second step is then the pilot project, scientifically controlled pilot projects. For a duration of 5 years, and of course, only adults with certain regional limitations can actually purchase them. We will look into that in a minute. So what does the leaked draft law actually say? So looking into that, there are various articles which are kind of interesting to read. It's a relatively long draft, to say at least, and we are going to look into the more important articles right now. The first one is, of course, we are going to create a new law. Well, that's typically German. We are going to have a law which is going to create a new law, which is called the Cannabis-Abgabegesetz, which regulates actually in which way the cannabis associations, these cultivation associations, can actually distribute cannabis to their members, how they are established, how they can grow, and of course also the quality control of the respective cultivation. This Article 2, and then I think that's important, is a change of the German Narcotics Act. And this is one of the even more severe changes here, because the THC related products and THC will be taken out of the German Narcotics Act and, of course, transferred to the new Cannabis Dispensary Act with some changes. But that means actually that cannabis products will not be anymore narcotics, which has significant impact, and I will come back to that later, also on the medical market. And of course, then we're having a look into the others, laws which need to be amended, and of course also the amendment to the Road Traffic Act, an important issue which sometimes is really neglected. So let's have a look into a little bit more detail into this law. Well, as I said, up to 3 female plants can be actually grown by each individual, adult individual in the household, and of course combined with an obligation to prevent the access to minors. Okay. Second, the respective non-commercial cultivation in the associations can have up to 500 members. Now, that's interesting to see here as well. There is a limitation planned for each member over 21, which they can obtain up to 50 grams per month. The adults between 18 to 21 years old can only purchase or get actually cannabis flowers of 30 grams per month with a THC content of 10% or less. Maybe somebody can educate me how that is going to be controlled, because that is a plant which we know has different specifics. Of course, we can, to a certain extent, have that limitation. But you know, the question is, how is then that be cultivated? So we have here cultivation for adults above 21, and here we have cultivation for the adults between 18 to 21. In fact, I believe that this is relatively difficult to establish, in particular on a non-profit basis. Whereby the actually draft law, and it's still a draft law, says that these cultivation associations have to finance themselves through the membership fees and not from the outside. There's a strict advertising ban, of course, and the cannabis associations, the cultivation associations have a very strict monitoring and documentation obligation towards the authorities, which will be randomly checked at least once a year. What comes along with that is the decriminalization of possession of cannabis in a loud amount. We are talking about 30 grams, 25 grams, 30 grams, which an individual can actually carry without being punished. There are certain rules, and now we come to the more practical side of the consummation, which means, first of all, we have exclusion zones around areas where children are usually present. Neighbors should not be disturbed. In pedestrian areas, the consumption of cannabis is prohibited between 8 a.m. in the morning till 8 p.m. in the evening. And I'm not kidding. That is exactly what the draft law says. There will be the introduction of new criminal provisions in case of a violation, which will be less strict than we have it in the Narcotics Act. So you see, from a practical point of view, we have a number of issues which have to be adhered to. Maybe that is not what you expected, but that's exactly what the draft law currently says, which is still under discussion in the respective ministries. So the amendment to the Narcotics Act, I think, is an important issue here. Let's see what the removal, of course, of cannabis here of the respective act has a certain impact, of course, on the medical market as well. It will not be longer a narcotic. So physicians will not, and we'll see that later, not be now prescribing a narcotic. This is going to reduce, to a certain extent, their reluctancy to prescribe cannabis for specific patients. The narcotics prescriptions are red. It's a different piece of paper. And every time physicians is using that, there's a certain barrier, at least psychologically, should I or should I not actually prescribe it? And we know that in the medical market, there's a certain reluctancy of physicians to widely prescribe cannabis for medical purposes, which an obstacle which I think the industry needs to overcome with further education of physicians and, of course, more information about the use of cannabis for patients. As a result, the BTMG will not be longer applicable to cannabis-related offenses. We will have that now transferred to the new Cannabis Act, as I said, with leveling down the punishment for the possession and any kind of violations with regard to cannabis. So what we're going to do right now is look into a little bit more in detail into that act here. This is the amendment of the Road Traffic Act, which is sometimes neglected in the discussions, but it is important. And it's addressed in the law as well, and we see what actually the changes will be. We have, with regard to alcohol, a very clear, strict threshold and a limit for the consumption of alcohol and then driving. This is not yet established for cannabis. So if we legalize cannabis, this is an issue which, of course, also the respective police, actually, the traffic police brought up and said, hey, what can we do in order to find a certain kind of thresholds here in the level of cannabis which has been used by the respective driver. And is he fit for driving or not? Who is going to judge that? Because different from alcohol, you can still have a certain amount of cannabis in your blood, but you're still 100% fit for driving, and the other way around. So that will be an interesting discussion, of course, and we'll see how that is going to work out. They are currently discussing in which way. One, how can we test that? Second, what will be the limits in the future? So if we look into that draft law, it is not as interesting or not as promising as we all expected, actually. If you look into the leaked draft law, the various provisions are, from our point of view, much behind what we have seen in 2022. And now the question is, of course, how can we react to that? What is the overall possibility in the future? Well, I think what is important to say is that we have the possibility to open at least the use of cannabis for recreational purposes by adults, which is positive, I think. However, if you look into the respective THC limits, which I just addressed for the use of cannabis in the social clubs, I don't see that the argument of the government of last year to protect the youth and further increase the quality for the user of the respective product is going to be met by the first pillar here. The state authorities are supposed to carry out the random checks. They have not yet the infrastructure. They do not have personnel, nor do they have the respective financial possibilities to really look into how going to look into, let's say, 10 different cultivation associations here in Berlin, or let it be 5, and just calculate, such a association, if it has 500 members and they are all above 21, and they are handing out 50 grams per month, if I'm not mistaken, they have to cultivate, they should cultivate 300 kilograms per year, one club. So now you have to find a space in Berlin, take into consideration that you have to stay away from schools, from kindergartens and other areas which are prohibited. Maybe you can point out a place in Berlin where we can actually cultivate this. Some of our clients have done that, and frankly speaking, there are not many places in Berlin where you really could do that, because we have a concentration of schools and kindergartens and sports arena where you should not grow. How should it be grown? I think that's important. Indoor growth for recreational cannabis is not actually really defined. The law speaks about greenhouses, at least, secured greenhouses. But it doesn't say, hey, what is the quality? Is it GMP? Is it GACP? Is it below that? Or what is the quality? This will probably be more defined in the future. And of course, the security. How should the greenhouses be secured? We all know that the 3 licensees for cultivating medical cannabis in Germany had to fulfill significant, I said really significant security measurements in order to really cultivate cannabis here in Germany. The security measurements are really, to a certain extent, of course, very expensive to establish, but will they be applicable also to the cultivation of recreational cannabis in Germany or not? Not really yet defined. So there are lots of questions, lots of issues which the law leaves open, in particular on the practical side. So what we're going to see here is indeed changes which are in comparison to the 2022 approach as really difficult. The key point paper of April this year is significantly behind the October 2022 paper. The situation under international European law was clear from the outset, but the German government presented that plan transparently in order maybe to get an exception, a kind of a allowance, a nodding from the European Commission, which unfortunately the Commission did not do. So it was therefore consistent with its further policy. Well, we have countries in Germany which are very much supporting the German approach of October 2022. The Czech Republic actually is very much supporting our approach and also has announced that it could be possible that they would legalize and are being drawn before the European Court of Justice. They would fight it out. At least that is what some sources say. We'll see whether this is going to happen. But from our point of view, full legalization will only be possible after the change of the European law. It will not be possible by any kind of, for the European countries, it will not be possible to do that in a different way, which is a long process. So have a look into the time frame. What can be actually expected? Well, their first pillar actually is now under discussion. We have a draft law which is going to describe very clearly what are the respective next steps. And the question is, of course, will there be an implementation of the law before the year end. Well, that's why I said here, that's the time frame according to our Ministry of Health, Mr. Lauterbach. We have been so far a little bit more pessimistic about the time frame. The law is yet under discussion between the various ministries. It then has to go actually to the cabinet. From the cabinet, it will be presented to the parliament. And then, of course, we will see whether this can and will be implemented. Will it be before the year end? I have my doubts on that, to be very frank. At least the first pillar, it may be beginning of 2024. I would be surprised because take into consideration the political discussion which we will have about that law. And we have already heard from the more conservatively governed states in Germany that they are not in favor of that law, that they will lead to have the discussion within the parliament. And the question is, can it be then really possible to release that new law without the second chamber, the so-called Bundesrat? All laws or new laws in Germany which have an impact on the various states, and the question is how big that impact should be, need to be confirmed by the Bundesrat, with the second chamber, which consists of the member states, of the states in Germany. And we have currently a conservatively ruled majority in the Bundesrat. So we see some obstacles here, and we'll see what is possible if this law will come into the parliament. I believe that the conservatively governed states will definitely oppose any kind of approach which Lauterbach and Özdemir, when they presented this new law and the position paper in April, say we don't need the Bundesrat for this law. You can argue that, and we'll see what the discussion will bring out. If that will be the case, the whole process will be further prolonged, and we will probably see that not happening before mid of 2024. And let's see what the outcome will be. We do not believe that the yet discussed draft law will be in the cabinet before the summer break, which is starting in 14 days. So it will be probably after the summer break in September. And then, of course, the whole process will start, which means beginning of 2024 is more realistic than anything in 2023 for the first pillar. The second pillar, actually, the law will be released after the summer break. Why this has been not done together with the first pillar? Well, good question. My favorite solution, in case the European Commission would not have approved the first approach, was the second pillar. Let's do scientific controlled projects, roll it out over Germany, and have it controlled. It's very similar to Switzerland, in order to really have an access for the adults to the use of recreational cannabis. Well, unfortunately, that has not happened, so that's the timeline here. So what is the potential impact of the legalization here? Well, let's have a look at that chart. The numbers are not from me, to say at least, and it's interesting to see. There is an exemplary calculation of Professor Haukapp of the University of Düsseldorf. They have compared the fiscal impact of the two-pillar model in comparison to the potential full legislation. And as you can see, well, we don't have a cannabis tax on the first pillar. And for all those who are going to export cannabis products into Germany, the first pillar is anyway not interesting because it's self-cultivation at home or in these respective cannabis clubs. On the second pillar, we'll see the government still said, hey, we prefer domestic cultivation even for the second pillar compared to imports from outside. Whether this will still be the case, take into consideration the potential quantity which may be needed to fulfill the needs of those who may qualify for the scientific pilot projects is a different question and not yet solved. Income tax, well, it's 1/10 of what we have actually as a potential full legislation income. Social Security. Well, if you compare that all together here, and very questionable the police expenses and the legal expenses here, I believe they are probably not really a saving. We have a total of 1.1 billion euros for the two-pillar model and 4.7 billion of income in the full legalization process. So obviously that was not a major argument for the legislator right now. So what is the potential impact on the medical market? We discussed that actually 2 days ago at the Investors Forum, and it was kind of interesting to see also the approach of the industry on that. And I'm going to share that to a certain extent. I think it's what is definitely happening is that with the reduction of the cannabis, or the exclusion of cannabis from the Narcotics Act, we have an increase of prescriptions automatically. Well, on the other hand, we know that we have a large number of self-payers currently. I don't know whether you're familiar with that healthcare system in Germany. We have a so-called statutory health insurance. Everybody has to be insured, health insured. These statutory health insurances are going to reimburse the patients also for cannabis products. If there is an approval, which is kind of an exception, because other products, you don't need a prior approval in order to be reimbursed. So what is going to happen? The patient is going to his doctor. The doctor says, yes, I would like to use cannabis for the treatment of your disease. Now, a statutory health insured patient has to file an application to the health insurance together with his doctor. That will be approved or not approved. You will see that in a minute. And in 65% of the cases, we have an approval. So then actually the doctor can prescribe cannabis. The patient takes the prescription to the pharmacy, and the pharmacy is going to be reimbursed by the respective health insurance. So that is what is going to happen. We have, of course, a number of patients who do not want to go through that burden. They do not want to apply to the statutory health insurance. They are self-payers. They just pay it to the pharmacy and are not going to be reimbursed. How large that group is difficult to judge because they don't appear in any kind of statistics. There is a belief that we have around 40, maybe 50, maybe even 60% of self-payers of the whole market. So are they moving over to the recreational market, yes or no? It's a question which I think is still open, and we can have a look into what has happened in Canada. As you can see here, the impact in Canada was to a certain extent more significant than what we actually expect here in Germany. And I think that's important to say, because Canada doesn't have any kind of statutory health insurance as we have it here in Germany, with the consequence that, of course, those who are going to reimburse rather would stay with the prescription and be reimbursed than move over to be self-payers. But the development actually, from my point of view, is difficult to be transferred to the German situation because of the health insurance system. And here we have some facts and figures from Barmer Ersatzkasse, which is one of the statutory health insurers. And they say at Barmer, 79% of the patient applications for medical cannabis were approved in 2021, which is a great number. The average, as I said, is somewhere in the region between 60 to 65. And their further applications, by the way, are not necessary. You don't have to apply every time you're going to be reimbursed or getting a prescription. So it's reasonable to assume that the patient pool will stay relatively consistent, at least those who are going to be reimbursed. So what is the further impact here? I think that's most important factor is the question of how do we going to define the quality of medical and of recreational. That is something which is not yet defined. How does the production facility look like? What are the price structures? Of course, also of the medical cannabis in comparison to the recreational cannabis. For the recreational cannabis, as I said in the first pillar, I don't know whether this is really economically feasible of a club with 500 members on a non-profit basis to really grow cannabis. There need to be solutions, from my point of view, to work together, even to have cannabis clubs and cannabis associations, cultivation associations combined in order to grow cannabis and not leave it to the 500 members to grow it somewhere in the backyard of the respective association. In Canada, actually, the legalization has led to supply of shortages for patients, as many producers turned against medical cannabis in favor for the recreational market. Whether this is applicable in Germany is also a question. Well, the point is, despite Pillar 1, for Pillar 2, where do we get the cannabis from? We have 3 licensed producers who can, to a certain extent, ramp up. Konstantin von der Gröben from Demikon said we can do 20 tons a year. Currently, you know, these licensed cannabis producers in Germany are allowed to produce 10.4 tons in 4 years, which is 2.6 tons in a year by 3 licensees, plus 10% in addition, which is only a fraction of the market. We don't know how the future will look like. We have not seen any sign from the BfArM whether they're going to tender out for medical cannabis cultivation for the next 4 years, because only for a 4-year contract. So that's also a question whether the 3 licensees could actually supply that second pillar market. From my point of view, if you really roll that out on a broadly basis, not possible. Even if they start building new facilities, which takes some time, as we all know, I rather see if we really have a demand of recreational cannabis for that second pillar, I really see the possibility for exporters here as well. To what extent? Difficult. The government still says, we would like to have domestic supply also for the second pillar. Will that be practical? Well, we'll see. I have my doubts on that, to say at least. So if we look into what has happened so far and what we can expect here, the overall, or the key point papers, as I said, is a little bit behind it. The various EU members are actually going to try to influence the respective developments in the European Union. And I think what is important, and I would really like to cite that because that's so interesting, is from the key point paper of April 2023. At the same time, the federal government is continuing its efforts to promote its approaches among its European partners, including examining the extent to which it will be possible for a sufficient number of EU member states to take the initiative in order to make the relevant EU legal framework more flexible and develop it further in the medium term. That's a statement. I think that's a positive statement, but what is medium term? So we're talking about 5 years, talking about 6 years. Maybe we have another change in the government in Germany. I think the next election, if I'm not mistaken, are sometime next year. So this will be kind of a different approach here. But without changing the EU framework, it will not be possible to really cultivate, distribute cannabis for recreational purposes in Germany and in the European Union. So the German system, even if it's a first step, and that's what I said at my beginning, is a good step forward. We will hear today in the various discussions on the panel here, what are the ideas of the implementation? How should it be done? What is actually the credo of the current government in order to implement the legalization of cannabis for recreational purpose? Having said that, I'm going to finish. I think we have a very positive way in the front of us in Germany. It is not as quick, it is not as intense as we actually expected it back in October 2022. But it is a good step forward. It is a long-lasting process which needs support of all stakeholders in the industry. Of not only the lawyers who are doing the administrative work and trying to do some lobbying, but of course of all the associations we have, of all the stakeholders of the industry, in order to really make that happen. And will Germany make that happen? Yes, it will. The question is only when. Thank you very much.
Peter Homberg. We have 4 or 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions they want to ask Peter, you can maybe raise your hand. We can come down to you. I have one over here, and there's also microphones there and there if you're in the back. We'll start with this guy here.
Hi there. My name is Natal Partansky. I'm one of the exhibitors here, and I'm based out of California. So has anyone on your team specifically looked at the market boom-bust cycles that different independent markets in the United States have gone through, mostly because of the correlation between the black market and regulation and taxes? Because I saw the presentation. It doesn't seem like that's really a sensitivity, and I think that's probably paramount for you to look at.
Yeah, we have looked at it. You are sitting actually 4 rows below my colleague Eric Berlin, who is here today. He's heading the US cannabis practice at Dentons. And we are, of course, steadily contacting each other and discussing what are the various developments in different states in the United States. Some of the measurements can be taken as an example and can actually also be positively used for the discussion which we have currently here in Germany. Indeed, we had the week before last week a meeting with representatives from the ministries at our offices together with the industry representatives and, of course, also the associations. And we have discussed the current draft. It's still a draft. Whether we see that in that form is still questionable. It is still a process. What I presented here is what this draft says. Whether it will be really in the cabinet and through the parliament in the same form is still a question. But that's what we actually have proposed. We discussed that with the various members of the ministries, and they saw the difficulties which, in fact, in particular, the first pillar will have. You know, the question is also, where do we get the seeds from? Are there any seed exporters here in the room? Yep. It is definitely interesting for you, because if you have seeds which are approved for import into Germany for the cannabis clubs, that is definitely a step forward. You can do that. And then how do those who do home grow get their seeds? Well, they get them from the cannabis clubs. Even if they are not a member, they have to go to a member. That's what this law says, and it's not my idea. They have to go to a member and then go to the cannabis club, and then actually get their seeds for growing the 3 female plants at home. Yes. So it's not a joke. That's really what this law says. The question is whether it will be possible for home growers to really order seeds from approved companies and with the approved variety of seeds. Is an open discussion. It's an open discussion, but not in the law yet. So these are the discussions which are currently going on. But thank you very much for your question.
Thank you. Bo?
Yeah, my name is Bo Whitney from Whitney Economics. I'm based out of Oregon, but we do global forecasting in the space. The data that I'm going to present tomorrow at 10:15 reflects a lot of what you're saying in terms of requirements and ramps and impacts and all this. And I actually have a forecast going out to 2030 for Germany. But my question is, in terms of influencing EU policy and in terms of making an accelerating reform, would it be possible if multiple countries like Germany, Czech Republic, and others team up and then force the EU's hand? And then also, second question is, where does Malta play into this? Because Malta is doing some good stuff on the medical side, but they're not necessarily supporting the recreational side. But, you know, where does Malta play into all this as well?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, very interesting. I tried to address that during my presentation. That is actually the plan. Those countries who are in favor of the legalization of cannabis for recreational purposes have to team up within the European Union. And Germany will, obviously, that's what we have heard here as well, hopefully take the lead on that. But you know, we have different member states and different sizes of member states. If you look into France, for example, we don't see much of a movement in that direction. The opposite is the case, actually. If we look into the Czech Republic, they are supporting it. Spain, Portugal may also be very supportive on that. Denmark, maybe. But there are other countries, which Hungary, for example, who are also members of the European Union, may see that differently. So it's an uphill battle, to say at least, and there are lots of obstacles. But the more member states are joining forces, the better is the possibility that the EU Commission is going to think things through. It is not, you can't force them. That's the point. Malta is a very interesting development. It would be going too far to go into details here with regard to their club system and the recreational side. But it's a, if I may say so, and I hope nobody is here from Malta, it's a small member state with not that significant influence. That's the point. But we can learn from them. I think what they have done and in which way it has been done. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Let's hear it again for Peter Homberg.